Welcome back, Airbnb family. Today, we're talking about guest experiences and some statistics that you need to know about as a host so you can be the best host ever. I'm doing this video because Brian Chesky did a host Q&A about a week ago where he made some statements that were in a quite positive spin about the platform, but you kind of need to know the whole story because you need to respond to guests empathetically because some guests have had some bad experiences and you need to know why and when and where. So Brian Chesky said that 0.004% of all reservations, that's a very small number, have a serious occurrence or serious incident. But by serious, we're talking like murder, assault, home burning down, things like that. Where Nick Shaprio told Inc.com in an interview maybe a couple years ago that 75% of guests leave a review and 90% of those are positive. So what that boils down to is you have 2.5% of reservations that have a neutral or negative review. But there's also 25% of all guests who don't say anything. And we all know the occurrence where a guest didn't have a good stay, they might have had a problem, but they felt like they could address it with the host directly and tell the host privately instead of leaving a negative review or leaving a review at all. So that means that it's not just simply 2.5%. Well, I came across a blog, and that blog was called Asher and Lyric. I'm going to leave the link in the description below. And that blog, they did some independent research, and of course it's cited in the blog I'm going to share, but they did some research and they found that 3 to 7% of all stays have a negative occurrence or negative experience. And so they break down why these experiences happen. So it wasn't really far off from what Nick Shapiro said. It's worse than, of course, what Nick said, but not that much worse. So here are the 6 main reasons why people have a negative experience, and then we're going to talk about customer service too. Okay? So number 1, the biggest one, is that 20% of guests, 20.5% of guests experience a host canceling the reservation within 24 hours of their arrival. That's a big number. And let me give you context. I have about 47 active properties. I have on average 8 to 13 stays per property per month, as long as it's not a monthly booking. And I'd say that over 10% of our properties are booked multi-month, right? So let's wipe them. So let's say 40 properties with an average of 10 stays per month. That's 400 stays. So if you have 20% of guests who have a cancellation, that's the reason why they had a bad experience, and between 3 to 7%, that's 5% on average of guests having a bad experience. Well, that means 1% of all reservations, somebody gets canceled within 24 hours or less. Well, we have 400 reservations a month, which means on average, we should be canceling by accident 4 stays a month, and we don't. Okay? So this means that there are hosts out there who do this with greater frequency. So I am a professional host. This is what we do. So that's one of those things that don't happen to us because, of course, we never have those issues because we don't live in the home or, we've kind of got our flow down. But there are a lot of new hosts or novice hosts or people hosting like illegally or without permission, and they get caught and then they have to cancel their reservations and are told they can't host anymore. I think that's where most of that's coming from. Okay. So if you're a good host, that's an experience that you don't have to worry about. But there's also a positive, which is Airbnb tries to solve it by putting those guests in another Airbnb listing. They want to keep the guests on the platform. So I'm sure plenty of you have gotten calls the same way that we have saying, we would like you to take this guest in tonight. Do you have availability? We see your calendar's open. Do you have it? So by not dropping your prices crazy low all the time and by having some open availability the day of, you might get a call from Airbnb saying that we need to place this guest. So that happens sometimes. Another stat, the lowest one, is that 1.1% of guests feel discriminated, that their experience was discrimination. There was something on the news lately that African-American guests got stopped by the police on the way out of their Airbnb booking because somebody in the neighborhood decided that those people looked sketchy. I don't know if it's the same one, but I read about another one where Bob Marley's granddaughter was discriminated against. And so if there was 2 of them that happened, that would be absolutely wild. Another one is over 15% of guests get scammed by their hosts. Now, this probably happens more in places like New York or overseas, where I've actually heard about this one in New York, where during special events or like peak seasons, somebody will create an Airbnb account, right? And they'll make this listing and it looks great. And then some reason they get the guest to pay them off of Airbnb for the listing. right? They do some sort of, fraud on Airbnb, get somebody interested in the place. They take a payment off booking or off the platform where they're no longer protected. And then they show up and there's no property. Well, Airbnb doesn't owe that guest anything because the person really didn't book on Airbnb. So Airbnb is not going to come save the day. That's a pretty crazy one. Another one is that the listing was inaccurate. So over 12% of guests claimed that the listing was inaccurate in some way, right? It didn't have a king size bed when it said it had a king size bed. It doesn't have a washer or dryer, or the washer or dryer doesn't work. There's things like that. There's a TV, but there's absolutely no cable, no streaming, no internet for the TV. It's just a TV. There's things like that guests get really upset about, or there weren't the amenities that they advertised, like the pool. Now, this happened to us where the pool was getting worked on at one of our properties, and the guests showed up and they couldn't use the pool because the pool was under maintenance, and they got upset about it. So that's one of those things that you really don't have a lot of control over, but you have to be careful. And then a small percentage, like 3.3% of guests, claimed that the listing was completely fake or non-existent, kind of like the whole scam thing. So again, these are things that guests go through. So the moral of the story on all of these is that with the fact that 3 to 7% of all reservations have a negative experience, and there's so many bookings on Airbnb per month. There's such a high amount of volume that the presence of negativity is known and it's real, and people talk about it. And so even if a guest has a negative experience, they're still going to book again, unless it's really, really bad. They're still going to use the platform, hopefully, but they're going to have that once bitten, twice shy kind of thing. So if you have a guest that is lacking patience or goodwill, it's probably because, they've had another bad experience on Airbnb. And I've had guests kind of confide to me that they've had bad experiences. And those things kind of affect how they book moving forward. And so it's our job as hosts to give guests a consistent and high quality stay, because Airbnb is still generally in the first 2 phases of adoption. It's not reached its critical mass. And I think that the home sharing economy has a lot of growth yet to do. And so adoption and trust is really built on us hosts, right? That's that first line of defense. If we do a good job, then the guests don't need to call, Airbnb customer service. But that leads us to the second problem here. So those 6 statistics of what normally goes wrong, that's hosts and people who use the Airbnb platform as, service providers. But the other one is customer service. Brian Chesky and his team talked about this as well on this host Q&A. I'll put the link to that video in the description. They said that they really doubled down on their help workflow, or the help flow, which they claimed that last year 80% of phone calls got answered in under a minute. They're going to be adding chat as a feature, as a way to communicate with Airbnb for help, things like that. It's because 82% of guests who called customer service claimed that it was a problem, right? So 82% of guests who had a problem and called customer service said that they had an issue with customer service themselves, like the customer service wasn't helpful. Now, Brian Chesky and his team did say that it's because Airbnb grew so quickly that they had a hard time keeping up with the new amount of bookings, right? Because customer service is something you staff for, and they didn't staff to plan to be where they were. They kind of grew faster than projected, and that's kind of what their explanation was. But 53% of all of these guests that had a problem with customer service, during their negative stay or during their stay, they said that that was a primary concern. So even the little problem, like the host check-in instructions aren't accurate, I'm having a hard time checking in, right? They're just trying to get in to go to sleep. Airbnb customer service became the real problem. If Airbnb customer service was better, maybe it could have been handled better. And so with that said, we as hosts are the first and main line of defense, and Airbnb is trying their best to keep up. But if we do a better job, then Airbnb's staff has less work to do, and it kind of makes it easier for everybody, because then there's less workflow or workload, and maybe Airbnb's team can do a better job the better we do. So I think what we can take away from this and Brian Chesky's talk is, I don't think he wants to scold hosts for being bad hosts. It's not something that he will ever want to do on his own video. But I think if he could say that without PR jumping down his neck, I think he would have this public call out to us hosts and and ask us to do a better job and think a little bit more in depth about our business. So with that said, though, I'm going to post the actual breakdown of Brian Chesky's Q&A, because what I did is I did a video in 7 minutes of this 45-minute long video reel. I did a 7-minute breakdown of everything that they talked about just to save you guys some time. So I'm going to link the blog for the market research that was done with guest experiences, and I'll link the Inc.com article too. They're both, of course, negative in flavor, but that's not the point. I'm not trying to dog Airbnb or dog other hosts, but as hosts, we need to know when guests have negative experiences, what those typically tend to be, and what kind of negative branding we are working through. Because even though we don't agree with it, perhaps, right, it's still something that other people might think. And if it's real to somebody else, we as hosts need to be empathetic to that and respond to them kind of on their terms. If you want to win your customer over, you've got to kind of meet them 99.9% of the way and then walk them back. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have any other questions, you want me to clarify something, because I know that was kind of a scramble, totally ask for it in the comments. I'll be here for you. So thank you for watching Airbnb Automated, and I'll see you on the other side.